Marolere, koreke u huvanga ngai whatapu tō beo homo whanuana, kai mai anga homo nofo, kai tāke whai ai ki whahoha koina. Greetings from Nam, otherwise known as Melbourne, on the cluster of islands now known as Australia. I thank Professor Claessens and the organizers of this conference for the opportunity to share a few observations and thoughts with you. And I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. I'm also grateful to Professors Gerald West, Stembizo, Zoane, Helder Carlos, and the Ujamaa team for the excuse to return to the problematics of space with this talanoa. This is work in progress, and I welcome your feedback, your pushback, and redirections as well. I will speak to a PowerPoint presentation. Pardon my name dropping. But I must acknowledge some of the shoulders on which I sit to offer this talanoa. My journey on the problematics of space goes back to the works of Paul de Man and Michel Foucault in post-structuralism and critical theory, and also to Philip Davies and David Kleins in biblical studies, and to many conversations with my mentors. And I can name only a few of them here, David Gunn, Dana Phil, Claudia Camp, and Gary Phillips, and David Jobling. And I apologize, I don't have an image for David Jobling. I have not been able to access my collection of pictures from when he visited Tonga, and then also when he visited Australia. And there are many others who pushed me to think of history in terms of space, event, and body versus era, epoch, and time. And they pushed me to engage with space and body in biblical events, or in, to borrow from Wimbush, in scripturalized events as ideological / political / theological constructions. While Kleins and Gunn hailed from the clusters of island now known as Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, they moved to the UK and then Gunn to the USA. And they probably moved because they were looking for the place where the grass is greener. But that's where the other folks that I've named are, or were. As you can see in the images, my journey on the dynamics of space was under the influence of white folks. And over the years, I have incorporated native elements to make the journey relevant for me and for other natives, and allow non-natives to have a feel and an understanding of who we are and how where we are influence how we think. One of those native elements is talanoa, which I have brought into the attention of biblical and theological scholars who dare to engage with my own work. Talanoa is one of the oralizing practices in Pacifica, and the term refers to three events. First, talanoa refers to story. Bear in mind that every story is the intersection or interweaving of many stories. Second, talanoa also refers to the act of telling a story, and since a story is a weaving of many stories, the act of telling awakens traces and remembering of other stories. And in the context of this presentation, the event of telling spatializes a network of scripturalized stories. Third, talanoa offers, or talanoa refers to conversation, to conversations around story and telling of story. So this third aspect, inviting conversation, is an opportunity to invite the audience to participate, the audience or the readers to participate in the oralizing and scripturalizing processes. Talanoa is the confluence of all three: story, telling, and conversation. Biblical texts construct the story in textual and ideological spaces, but this construction remains in the stage of story, the first realm of talanoa. Biblical critics move the process into the next stage, and this is where talanoa brings the story out of the text and into the realms of telling and conversation. The book of Ruth, for instance, gives us a story. Talanoa invites me, along with other readers, to tell the biblical story as the intersection of stories, and to invite our audience, our readers, to engage in conversation around the story, as well as empower and permit them to retell the story and invite more conversations. I have coined the term restoring for these evolving events. The Tongan poet and literary critic Jione Havea, her poem, The Way Ahead, captures the interweaving of talanoa cultures in Pacifica landscape and worldviews.
We cannot see far into the distance, neither can we see what used to stand there. But today, we can see trees separated by wind and air, and if we dare to look beneath the soil, we will find roots reaching out for each other, and in their silent intertwining, create the hidden landscape of the future.
To piggyback on Konai's poem, talanoa is at the roots of the way ahead. My attention in this talanoa is on native spacing, and I prefer to speak of spacing versus space. What might native spacing look like in the restoring of the book of Ruth? In this talanoa, I present native spacing in relation to the widows in the story. And I go back to the beginning of the two people in this scripturalized ideological construction. The people of Judah, from whom the widow Naomi came, and the people of Moab, from whom came the widows Ruth and Orpah. The beginning of the people of Judah goes back to the story of Abram. One instance in that story is significant for this talanoa. When Abram and his family first arrived at the land of Canaan with their many possessions and slaves, the story remembers and locates the people of the land. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Abram was a foreigner to Canaan, the land that later became Judah. The story remembers that the people of Canaan were already in the land. When the Lord told Abram to go to Canaan, And when Abram arrived at Canaan, the land of Canaan was occupied. The Canaanites were the natives, and they did not endorse the Lord's promise, nor did they invite Abram and his family. The people of Moab are not among the Canaanites. They are descendants of Lot, the nephew who came with Abram. Lot chose to separate from Abram, and he went to live among the people of Sodom. This was a bad decision because the Judean scripture considers the people of Sodom as wicked, and Lot had to be rescued from them twice. The second time, Lot took his 2 daughters to Zoar, and from there to a cave in the mountains where the daughters got Lot drunk. They slept with him, and they conceived. The firstborn bore a son named Moab, and the second bore a son named Ben-Ami. The people of Moab are relatives of the people of Judah, but they are considered wicked because of their links to Sodom and to an incestuous relation. They have been nativized by the biblical story. Here, being nativized means that they are seen and treated as if they are natives. Like the Canaanites, who were vulnerable to the arrival, settlement, advance, and exploration of Abraham, the Moabites are also made vulnerable in the story. Genesis 12:6 remembers the natives. Those were the Canaanites. Genesis 19 remembers relatives of the Israelites who were nativized. Those were the Moabites and Ammonites. Both the natives and the nativized come under the frame of native spacing. In Moab, Ruth and Orpah were native women, while Naomi was a foreigner who arrived as a wife and mother. In Moab, Ruth and Orpah became wives, and then the 3 women became widows. But the story does not tell us anything about their experience as widows in Moab. In the spirit of talanoa, according to which a story is the intersection of many stories, could the story of the widows in Moab be heard through the stories of the widows in Judah? Could the story of Naomi as an old widow back in Judah tell us something about the story of Naomi, the younger widow in Moab? Or should the question be, could the story of Ruth in Judah tell us something about the story of Naomi in Moab? How about the story of Orpah, the widow who returned to Moab? Entertaining answers for these questions require dabbling beyond the confines of the scriptural story into native spacing. Space and time do not allow me to dabble with those questions justly in this very unnative platform by speaking to a screen. So I will leave these questions for another opportunity. But I don't want to leave Orpah hanging. For the remainder of this talanoa, I will focus on Orpah, the native widow who returned to her people and to her God. 3 widows went on an exodus from Moab to Judah in Canaan. They appear to travel light because the narrative does not give them helpers like some male travelers in biblical memory. They pause their journey on the side of the road, a place that may be conceived as a biblical version of a bar, where propositions and transactions take place. Many, many, many moons earlier, Judah encountered a widow in such a place on the side of the road. And this time, a company of 3 widows paused on the side of another road for deliberation and dissension. The road where the 3 widows pause is rather quiet. The narrative empties out this road, but in the native Pacifica worldview, the land has eyes, and the landscape functions as the years of the ancestors and as registers for future generations of boundary crosses. Even if no human traveler passed by on the other side of this road, the context would have seen, heard, and remembered the exchange between the three women. And as we heard in Kornai's The Way Ahead, talanoa interweaves Pacifica landscape with Pacifica world and worldviews. The company of three widows paused on the side of an emptied road, and as they parted company, Naomi tagged Orpah as the sister-in-law who returned to her people and her gods. Naomi's tag depicts Orpah as a disloyal, regressing, bad Moabite woman. Returning to her people and to her gods was not Orpah's first choice. She was compelled to return when it became obvious that Naomi did not want her and Ruth to go all the way to Judah. Naomi used Ruth and Orpah to cover up her flight from Moab, but she did not need them for her entry into Judah. On a route and landscape that have heard the cries of diselected people, Ruth and Orpah were unwanted company for Naomi. Out of Moab, Ruth and Orpah walked into the space of liminality that has received the crushed bodies and cursed dreams of an earlier unwanted Exodus generation, not from Moab, but from Egypt. The three widows paused, and Naomi kissed Orpah and Ruth goodbye. They wept aloud. Then the two daughters-in-law talked back against Naomi. They both wanted to go all the way and to join Naomi's people. Their first response was therefore to dissent. Then Naomi countered. Naomi insisted that Orpah and Ruth go back to Moab. The second time, Naomi must have raised her voice as she preached about what they would not get if they went with her. She admitted that she was old and that she was bitter because the hand of the Lord has turned against her. And she was not certain that she would bear more sons to later become their husbands. Again, they wept aloud. Then Orpah kissed Naomi goodbye, and she was escorted out of the biblical text by the words of Naomi, which were directed at Ruth. Look, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. The company of three left Moab as widows, and waiting in Judah were the home and inheritance of their deceased husbands. As widows, all three of them had rights to claim what belonged to their dead husbands. They left Moab as widows, and they would have expected to gain something in Judah. There was an economic motive for Naomi's return, in a story in which inheritance and food are the currencies. But on the side of the road, like when the angel blocked the way of Balaam's ass, Naomi attempts to block Ruth and Orpah from reaching the gate in Judah, where economic transactions are formalized. In this light, Naomi is a hidden capitalist who wanted to consolidate all of the reserves and interests into her private trusts. On the side of the road, Ruth and Orpah had two options. They could push back in order to go along with a bitter mother-in-law who did not want them with her, or they could concede and risk being discredited by a narrative that has been relocated to entice allegiance to the flag and lineage of the Lion of Judah. The co-sisters-in-law parted ways. Ruth went on to give her womb for the favor of Judah's people and gods, and put her name on the title of the book, while Orpah returned to her people and gods. As the three widows parted, the narrative draws readers to celebrate Ruth, but forget Orpah. In the eyes of the Judean narrator, Orpah chose the wrong option. She was a bad woman. Without another word, Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye Then the focus of the narrative cleaves to the words and body of Ruth. The narrative silences Orpah and pits her goodbye kiss against Ruth's cleaving words and body. Orpah kissed Naomi goodbye, but Orpah did not kiss Ruth also. Orpah may have seen Ruth as inseparable from Naomi, or she may have expected Ruth to return with her to Moab. Whatever the reason, the goodbye kiss marks the point of separation between Ruth and Orpah. Her kiss is a marker for talanoa readers that widows are not all the same, and there are different kinds of Moabites. Orpah is not the same kind of Moabite woman as Ruth. When I did Bible studies on Ruth with communities at the Solomon Islands in 2019, I received several readings of the moment when the three widows parted ways. Some of the readings came in the form of drawings, and they all foregrounded Orpah compared to the foregrounding of Ruth and Naomi by Western artists. Readings from two of the small groups encapsulate the energies in talanoa and the opportunities in native spacing. The first group presented an upset Orpah, her hands behind her head, a posture of disappointment in Solomon Island communities, with tears streaming down her cheeks. Orpah faces and obliges the viewers, while Naomi and Ruth face away from the viewers. This Orpah has experienced the pain of rejection. The second group presented a happy Orpah, her hands up in the air, with thumbs up and gladly saying goodbye in some of the languages spoken in the Solomon Islands, saying goodbye to Naomi and Ruth. Ruth and Naomi were also happy to see Orpah leave their company. This reading of a happy parting of the way makes room for a joyous homecoming for both Naomi and for Orpah. The study groups affirmed both readings, and they did not feel it was necessary to argue for one reading to be more correct than the other. For the Solomon Islanders, the critical issue was not that the text was ambiguous and has multiple readings. Ambiguity and polyvalency are not their argument. Rather, what mattered to them was that the narrative gave them the space to participate in writing and drawing the afterlives of Orpah. The gaps and fractures in the story are not problems to be resolved, but opportunities to read with the text. In the series of Bible studies on Ruth across Pacifica that I undertook from 2018 to 2019, I learned that Orpah's decision to return to her people and to her gods could be a right decision. Hence, the critical task for our people is clear, that it is appropriate to return our minds and our bodies to our native people and to our native gods. I leave this task as an invitation for you to help people like us return our minds and our bodies to our native people and to our native God.